on the Gate, our Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood podcast. I'm Megan.
And I'm Meg.
And today we're discussing episode 42, Signs of a Counteroffensive.
In this episode, May and Marco's efforts to decode the research of Scar's brother yield progress, but it might be too late to prevent catastrophe. Violence is spreading across the land and will soon reach the northern border.
And this covers manga chapter 77, The Tables Are Turned, A New Transmutation Circle, and chapter 78, The Seven Deadly Sins.
Okay, let's jump right into this episode. It begins with seeing Scar and his gang. Al has been taken apart and is unconscious, and they have stopped in this old shack.
Yeah, in the manga, actually, Al wakes up while they're still walking through the snow carrying him, and poor May looks uncomfortable because she's carrying Al's loincloth.
Loincloth, which is covering nothing, so
yeah,
it's not
exactly.
really.
I think it's just the thought of it, where she's kind of like, I'm carrying his underwear.
yeah, I get it. It's kind of funny. May and Marco are working on deciphering the alchemy notes, and they keep finding references to gold and immortality throughout the notes, and they can't figure out exactly what's going on. And while they're doing that, Al wakes up, and May and Winry, of course, are very excited and relieved. And Al is just Al. He's apologizing for worrying everyone. And then there's this really cute scene where everyone is working together to put Al back together. I just found it so sweet because here's this group of misfits, and they're all like, yeah, let's get them back together, and it's so cute. Yeah,
you gotta help out.
Yeah. And while they're doing that, May you see a light bulb go off in her head, and she takes the binding from the notes and takes them all apart, and she begins matching the gold and immortality words together.
In the manga, I think May, she's really brilliant, actually. She specifically latches on to the thought that the notes are bound with string, a very flimsy thing for such important notes that would want to be preserved. So kudos to her for picking up on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then everyone gets distracted by putting together these notes, and they totally stop putting Al back together. And they never go back to it for the rest of the episode. But it's kind of funny, in the manga, they actually don't ever start to put it back together. But in fact, Marco, I think, says, we're not going to put you back together because you're just in case you pass out again, or something along those lines.
Oh, okay.
So that whole scene, that adorable scene, was totally fabricated, at least for now. Then they finish matching up the notes, and May draws, she connects the dots, and it shows a countrywide transmutation circle that Father and the homunculi are making.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone is disappointed. They're like, seriously, this is what the notes are showing? We already know this information. But Al is being himself, and he's like, of course there's more to it. And then while everybody's sitting thinking, Yoki, of course, the trash human being that he is, he sneezes without covering his mouth, and
that's what makes him trashy.
Yes, there's a bunch of papers that everybody just spent time putting together, and then he just sneezes and ruins it all.
Oh man,
he is an adult man. He can.
This is why we can't work in group projects.
But I guess it's okay, because then Al has a light bulb go off, and he suggests turning the pages over. And when they do this, a new circle is revealed based on Xingyi's alchemy, and it appears to be a counteractive to the other circle.
Nice.
And then we leave that there and go to Kimberly. He is in the mining tunnels now, and he's being gross and licking blood off his hands.
Well, he didn't want to use his bright white hanky in his
He-
suit pocket.
Yes, he is immaculately dressed. He can't get his own blood on on his outfit. Other people's, I'm sure he'll make an exception. And while he's down there, he finds I guess a big door with like an X on it, and he goes through it, and he finds mining carts and Sloth's tunnel, and that's when Pride arrives, and he tells Kimberly to carve a crest of blood at Briggs, because Sloth is almost done with the tunnel. We see Miles. He has arrived back at Briggs, and he tells Fullman and Buccaneer of Ed's disappearance, and then Fullman passes on that information to Breda, and I assume Mustang and everybody else that he can. And then we hear them discussing conflicts that are going on in the south and the east, and they're experiencing major casualties, and it seems like things are heating up as father's plans are reaching their climax. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And one other thing that I found interesting in this scene, when Miles in the manga, when Miles tells Fullman and Buccaneer of Ed's disappearance, he also mentions that they had been searching for 10 days. So,
oh wow,
already been missing for 10 days.
And they
crazy.
said, I like how they said like no bodies were found, so they're like, yes, they are missing. We can't confirm that they're dead, so they don't assume the worst.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it would be, yeah. It is strange that there are no bodies.
Right.
Like,
but if it were me, I'd be like, oh, there's so much rubble. They're probably buried and dead. I'm panicking. I'm doom and gloom.
But also, they were searching for 10 days, so, and they found nothing. Like, you would expect to find at least one body.
Good point. Good point.
Or like part of a body or blood or something.
Yeah.
Which
they can assume that Ed lived just from pure spite too.
They didn't mention like finding the rod. Like, Ed definitely left a lot of blood behind. And it wasn't like, I guess we didn't see like exactly like where he fell, but he fell in like an open space.
They should have, forensic analysis of that area.
Yeah, they should have maybe found the pool of blood, but anyway. Then we see that Sloth has finished, and then we see Father still sitting in his chair saying, the day of reckoning is near. Very ominous. And then we go back to a place that we haven't been to in a long time. Lior. Rose is serving food as the men of the town are rebuilding the city, and while she's doing that, a familiar face arrives. It is Hohenheim, literally crawling on the ground because he is starving, and he asks for food, which of course Rose is very kind, so she gives it to him, and she learns that he is looking for the Lido Church.
Yep. And when they find it in the manga, he sees the destruction left over from when Ed, took the statue and punched the priest, and he calls it tacky. Like, Hohenheim just looks at it and goes, that's very tacky.
Yep. I think that is a common theme with, like, Ed's creation. So many people are like, that's tacky.
It's awesome.
Yeah. It's just, like, classic teenage boy being like, yeah, this is so cool, and everybody else is like,
in 10 years, he's gonna look back at that and go, oh.
Yeah. So Rose takes Rose and this other guy take Hohenheim. I don't know what his name is. Not important enough, I guess.
I was trying to look at the end credits because I wanted to see if I could do a voice actor list for him, but it didn't say.
Wow. And they underground they find this toxic water, which is preventing people from like exploring the tunnel. And then Hohenheim just builds a bridge with alchemy and follows the tunnel, and he finds Sloth tunnel, and that's when Pride attacks, and Hohenheim like freaks out and he starts running and fighting back, and it's I don't know, he was kind of funny, like, oh man, it reminded me of like okay, I'm gonna describe it and then you can help me come up. It's like a scene, not a scene, like in real life where like you do something and you're like, oh shoot, no, like
Yeah.
that. Like I can't think of
Take it
like,
back, take it back.
yeah, like something specific.
Like, oh,
Uh,
I can think of that in everyday life. But
right?
like when you walk out the door and you're like, I know I'm forgetting something, and then it just clicks in your brain like, I left the stove on. Oh boy, and you like
Yeah,
just backtrack.
yeah, like that, like that. And while they're fighting, it's interesting because neither one, like Hohenheim has never met Pride. He doesn't recognize him immediately, and Pride doesn't recognize Hohenheim until Hohenheim like goes back into the tunnel that he came from, and Pride like can't go any further, and that's when Pride like stops and like, oh, you look like father. That means you must be Hohenheim. And this
To
is
be
when we
fair though,
learn.
when he was chasing Hohenheim, he mostly just saw him from the back. So this is the first time he got a good look at his face and was like, you
Yeah,
look familiar.
yeah. No, I'm not. I don't blame him. But honestly, I feel like, well, Hohenheim was just caught off guard, but he also should have been like, you look familiar.
Dwarf in the flask.
Yeah. And this is when we learn that Pride does have a container. He is trapped in the tunnel that Sloth made and Central City. He can't go beyond those limits, so he can't reach Hohenheim, who's not in the tunnel anymore.
Yeah, and do you think it has something to do with the fact that he's bound to Salim's body, like he has a human vessel? Well, maybe not human,
Mm,
not human, but like he has like a physical body. Maybe he can't stray too far from his body.
that, mm,
I mean, it probably has
I mean,
mostly to do with the tunnels, but
yeah, I was gonna say, to me, it seemed more like has to do with the tunnels and Central City, because like that's how the dwarf in the flask, like he had to stay in his flask.
hmm.
And if that was the case, then if Salim left, then he would be able to move, like go farther. And that doesn't seem like that's the case.
Right.
And like the tunnels, they go all around Amestris, so that's super far.
So Salim always has an alibi then, because he can send this shadowy form of himself wherever he wants while still being that sweet, innocent child in his household with his mom. And
Mm-hmm.
like, I wasn't anywhere except home and school,
Yeah. So Hohenheim and then asks Pride if he is angry, and Pride is like, nope, I left all unnecessary emotions in father, and I am Pride. And this is when we kind of hear that Pride is one of the seven deadly sins, and father separated the seven deadly sins from himself. So lust, wrath, envy, greed,
Gluttony.
gluttony, sloth, and pride.
I always forget about Sloth. I just like,
Right? Me
1, 2,
too.
3, 4, 5. I'm missing one. I'm missing one. There is a really interesting like video essay somebody did on YouTube about the seven deadly sins, their significance to the story and their significance to like real life correlations. I think I saved that to a playlist. It was probably the Full Metal Analysis playlist on our YouTube channel. So if you listeners want to check that out, that was a thoroughly interesting and entertaining video.
Maybe I should watch that too.
Yeah, it also covers the original FMA variations of the seven deadly sins.
Yeah, those are interesting. Anyway, as Pride is the first homunculus, father separated Pride from himself first. And Hohenheim says, oh, that makes sense because he was the strongest trait. And also, as we can see, Pride was given Father's original form. And then after all of this explanation, Pride is like, oh, let me take you to Father. And Hohenheim's like, nope, see ya. And he runs away. But he warns Pride that he will be back.
Until we meet again.
Yes, basically that's what happened. I'm just thinking, that meme. All right.
I tried doing the voice. Until we meet again.
Anyway. In the final scene of the episode, Drachma is launching an attack on Briggs. And then we see Kimberly is behind it, of course. And cannons fire. And then we see Kimberly with a smirk on his face. And the episode ends. But there is an end credit scene where we see Zampano calling Envy and telling them where Scar is hiding. Two things. One, there is a super funny meme that we'll be posting with the Envy and Bradley. And then also, like, just this whole scene of him, like, betraying them. My thought was that he did this because, like, when they first uncovered the notes and they're like, oh, this is not going to help us get our bodies back, then he decided to throw in his lot with the homunculi instead. What do you think? Why do you think he did it?
When we first watched it, honestly, I think at first I was like, oh, no, seriously, dude? And I was like, well, it's hard to change sides that easily. At least one of them had to be still bad. But then the more I thought about it and had time to, like, reflect on it, I thought, maybe this is a front. Maybe he's not really betraying them. I don't know. It just seems too
Of course you would think that.
I know, right?
Always want to see the good in people.
Yeah. I get hurt a lot watching these shows.
Yeah, you do. I'm too cynical. Anyway, that's the end of the episode. And then, yeah, we kind of have a lot to discuss. First thing that we wanted to discuss was a theory, or just like a question that we had was, does Hohenheim lose souls when he's starving? Like, does he lose some of his immortality?
Like using the energy from his Philosopher's Stone self. I think so, because, I mean, like, if you see him healing from, like, bullet wounds or, like, serious injuries and stuff like that, and, like, the red lightning, fizzles over his body, I think there must be an internal aspect of that too. Like say, he's starving, it would take a while, I would think, but I think having immortality might have a downfall in that regard because he could keep surviving and yet still feel the pain of hunger for a prolonged period of time. I think the same would go for, like, drowning. Like, if he was underwater and, like, holding his breath, his lungs were about to burst, but they'd be, like, repairing themselves, but he'd still be feeling that sensation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the next thing to cover is just, this isn't necessarily animation expertise, it's just something we kind of picked up on. The Drachma soldiers seem like they are modeled after Russian soldiers, and given that they're, in the freezing north and their country is quite large, I think that could be assumed that they're at least in part, supposed to represent that in the real world.
Yeah. No, when I saw the map of, like, Amestris and all the other countries, I saw Drachma and that immediately my mind was like, oh, Russia.
Yeah.
They definitely are modeled after that.
Yeah, and on to our most interesting discussion.
Yes!
The philosophical analysis of the separation of the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah. So this is, like, obviously in the episode 40 where they like introduce the dwarf in the flask, you kind of get a sense like, oh, maybe all the homunculi were created like from father. But this episode like confirms it, that he like separated the parts of himself, the 7 deadly sins, which are, we can just list them again, but lust, wrath, gluttony, pride, envy, greed, and sloth. And we just kind of wanted to discuss that. One, I wanted to kind of give a little bit of history, real life history, about like the what are the 7 deadly sins. And I found this interesting article on history.com, or I think it's like the History Channel. And originally the 7 deadly sins were first created in the 4th century by a Christian monk named, oh gosh.
Good luck.
Okay. Evagrius Ponticus. That's my best guess. And he created the 8 evil thoughts, which were gluttony, lust, avarice, which is greed, anger, sloth, sadness, vainglory, which we think is envy, and then pride.
It's sounding like Inside Out a little bit when they say sadness.
Yeah. I'm glad they removed sadness, because that's not.
It can lead to some dark places, but in and of itself, it's not a sinful emotion.
No, and it can lead to both good and bad. Not that like other things like anger can too, because like righteous anger.
Yeah. But sadness is more of, that's like I don't know.
Yeah, it's different. And these 7 deadly sins are called mortal or deadly because they lead to the death of the soul, which I thought was interesting, and then I agree with, because they can eat you from the inside and consume your thoughts. So this first guy in the 4th century created this list, and then in the 6th century, Saint Gregory the Great, who became Pope Gregory the First, he removed sloth and added envy. And then he, instead of listing pride on the list, he described it as the ruler of the other 7 vices, which became known as the 7 deadly sins. And then Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, he brought back sloth and eliminated sadness. And then he replaced pride with vainglory, but still kept it as the overarching ruler of the 7 sins.
Okay. I like saying pride better than vainglory, because I feel like pride just encompasses it more.
Yeah. You were saying that it makes sense. You can say what you said about pride before.
Oh, it makes sense that pride is the overarching, the main sin, the most deadly sin. Well, not only for the story, because pride's the first homunculus and he's the one with father's attributes the most, but like in the real world sense, a lot of sin just stems from pride and selfishness. So I mean, like, if you look at any of the 7 deadly sins, you can say that they can be categorized under the umbrella of pride.
I agree with that. So that was a little bit of history of the 7 deadly sins, which I personally find interesting. And another thing that we have seen posts about is like, we have the 7 deadly sins, and then we have like 7 virtues that the like good characters exhibit, that kind of juxtapose the 7 deadly sins. So we wanted to discuss what some of those are, and like characters that we think reflect those traits the most.
Yeah, so the image we found, well, first I'll go through like the antonyms. So opposite of lust is apathy or indifference. Opposite of wrath is delight and pleasure. Opposite of gluttony is restraint and temperance. Opposite of pride is humility. Opposite of envy is kindness. Opposite of greed is generosity and charity. And the opposite of sloth is being driven or industrious or diligent. And the image we found had oh, this hurts, but Maze Hughes as kindness, which is, opposite of envy, who ended up killing him. And Roy would be temperance. So the opposite of gluttony, which I like him juxtaposed
Yeah,
with lust, honestly, because he killed her. But
yeah. Except, okay, so it's interesting. So on the antonym for lust is apathy slash indifference, but then in this list they have the opposite of lust as purity.
oh, okay. And purity is represented by Nina.
Mm-hmm.
Ouch. Al is humility, Winry's patience, Riza's charity, and Ed is diligence. And I think for the most part I would agree with that list, but we also have thoughts of our own, I guess. Because we see the main seven as being Ed, Al, Winry, May, Ling, Riza, and Roy. So, I don't know, Meg, what are your thoughts on like which character we categorized with what?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Ed does fit with like diligence the
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
most. I think I agree with that. Um, Al, I could see him instead of humility being kindness
Yeah.
instead. Um,
I think that May would be delight. She's got that childlike innocence.
yeah, hmm
Ling, oh boy. I think Ling might
um,
actually be generosity because like the things he does are for his people.
that's true. Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. Winry, I think still patience because
Okay, yeah.
she
Gotta
had to
deal with a
put up,
lot.
yeah, she had to put up with Ed now. So,
Do you think Riza would actually be apathy? Because she kind of has that cold exterior, like I can handle anything.
hmm yeah, I could see that for sure. I think I would like put because like they have on this list purity instead of apathy or indifference. I don't know. She's not like totally
Well, no, but
like it
like
doesn't,
I
but
think
I
she
could
has that
see like her. Yeah, I
self-control.
could see her exterior being that way.
Yeah,
Yeah, I could actually see that because then like her and lust
yeah,
like are
compared to each other. So then
yeah.
that leaves Roy in the what, restraint? That still leaves him in restraint?
I feel like that.
Well,
I don't know if that fits. I could see
I
him
can see
being
it later in
maybe
the show, but
yeah. What about like maybe humility because like he realizes like what he's done in the past and like hey, I'm not
oh,
perfect and we need to and this
yeah,
country's not perfect and we need to change things.
yeah.
I don't maybe but then okay. And then on this list they also have purity. And so I was saying like I feel like Al fits both
He's such a pure
kindness
bean.
and okay. Al is in purity and then May is yeah, kindness or
Aw,
delight.
that's sweet. Yeah.
Yeah.
If any of our listeners
So
have thoughts about, what category each character belongs in, we'd love to hear that. It's so confusing, and it's hard because none of these characters are one note. They, like we've
mhm.
been struggling with, they can fit into multiple categories. And I don't know, even the seven deadly sins, like they're categorized by one specific sin, but they're definitely not, flat characters.
No, and I when I was working on this, I was thinking like, do these seven deadly sins, do they actually ever exhibit any of like the good qualities? And I was
Mm,
trying to think, because like
well,
I would say like gluttony, like he cared a lot for lust, like
Yes.
He,
Yeah.
I don't know, he felt
Felt
like,
attached to her, like
yeah,
maybe older sister or maybe
like it
motherly.
wouldn't necessarily use the word love, but like,
But definitely, like, he was sad when she died,
yeah,
and he was
yeah.
angry. Um,
And
even
greed, he cared, oh wait, can
oh
we
yeah,
say that he cared for his friends?
he
Like,
cares. Like the
yeah,
old Greed definitely cared about his friends. He used that. He like used himself as being Greed to explain it, though.
mm-hmm. But
But
like he did
I don't
care
think
for
he's
his
given
friends.
himself enough credit. Yeah,
Yeah,
he got
like
mad on their behalf.
yeah, basically like the characters, they're definitely not, even the seven
Right.
deadly sins are not just one dimensional.
Well, even
Um,
Sloth. I mean, the poor guy is diligent, even though he
yeah,
complains the whole time.
true, true. Um, and this just like obviously the seven deadly sins, like this whole concept is very Christian like
Yeah.
idea. And that just these antonyms to the seven deadly sins reminded me of like the fruits of the spirit, which I can which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Which I think just fits the
It fits the main protagonist very well because those are the
mhm
virtues that they learn throughout the series. And
mhm
I would say, like, I don't know, especially Ed's journey because well, love, obviously, his love for his brother and his love for Winry. Joy, he can find joy in even like the saddest of times because, I mean, he does smile and laugh throughout the series. Um, he's learning to find peace even in the circumstances he couldn't change, and like peace with his decisions. Like, in the episode where he got hurt, he's like, if this is what sparing someone's life is going to cost me, I'm going to learn to live with it. Uh, Patience. I mean, he's kind of impatient, being a hothead, but he also has the patience to learn alchemy, which takes a
mhm
long time. uh Kindness, he's definitely kind to other people in varying ways, but he values other people, which I think also can categorize goodness, and his faithfulness to his friends and family, and to like pursuing the right path, and trying to get Al's and his bodies back, and gentleness. I mean, again, he has a hard exterior, but he has his moments, especially with Al and Winry.
mhm
I think about like when he was holding Winry's hand, taking the gun away from her.
yeah.
Oh, and then self control. Like again, you wouldn't expect it of him because he gets so riled up, but he has the
He kn-
control
he
to like pull his punches when he knows
mhm
it's going too far.
yeah. Yeah, I so even though like this whole world it doesn't like our world religions and specifically like Christianity not part of this world, you definitely can see definitely some themes uh of that in
Yeah.
the world that the author created, and I would love to talk to her about this stuff and like why she chose to create the world that she did. Um,
Yeah, I'd love to read some of her other works because I know of at least two other manga series that she's created, and I want to see like if she uses the same inspirations for those worlds or if she goes a completely different route. I don't know.
yeah, that would be interesting. Maybe we should, before we finish this podcast, we should
Ooh, yeah.
pick that up and see if like there's similar themes. Um, and then the final thing regarding the homunculi that we wanted to discuss was like the creation of them. So the alchemist who created the dwarf and the flask slash homunculus managed to create something that contained these seven deadly sins of man, but then like lacked these virtues. How did he miss that? Because, like, like humans, yes, there are these, like, seven, or like, we have these seven deadly sins, or like, struggle with them, but then there's a lot of good things about humans, like, all these virtues. And, like,
And the
I
homunculus
wish, I
wanted
wish
to
they would
remove
have,
all the bad stuff, but he
yeah,
never focused on the good stuff. I'm kind
yeah,
of wondering if because he knew he wasn't human, he thought he just inherently didn't possess them.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because I was like going along the lines of like, so he used all we know is that this alchemist used the blood from Slave 23 to create this homunculus. And I was just wondering, like, is the author implying that these seven deadly sins like come from the flesh or like the body slash mind? Because as we
Oh.
discussed, like there's like the mind, body, and soul. So
And the
is the
soul
author
is separate from
implying,
the mind and
yeah, and
body.
like that's where the virtues come from.
Oh.
Um, which the soul, as we learned, it can't be created with like human transmutation. Once it's gone, it's gone. There's like
Oh, because
something
he doesn't
inherently
have,
different
yeah, he
and
doesn't have the
different.
human soul, so,
Yeah.
okay.
So that was like
Weird.
one theory that I had. I don't know
That's an interesting one.
what do
That's a
you
good one.
what do you think?
I mean, you definitely
Um.
have to explore it more, and there's still some questions I would have about it, but I kind of
Mhm.
like thinking along those lines that he's not human, so there are some things he can't have.
Mhm.
But then again, well, yeah, the body and mind, where the sins lie.
And then
Hmm.
like the soul is where the
There might be
virtues
some
are.
there
I
might be
don't
some
know.
theological debate
Yeah,
there, but
totally. That's but if that is the case, like how could he have made these virtues? Like how could they be
mm,
replicated if there wasn't a human soul and that's where the virtues are from?
mm,
Like was there a way or
that ooh,
I wonder if cuz to me like I always hear people say like babies or like kids you don't teach them to like be selfish or
right, you have to teach him to be
be
good
yeah,
because
so like and like we see the homunculus just like sitting in the flask doing nothing. Like do you think if the alchemist would have taught him those virtues, like is that how they would have been learned,
oh
is
man,
by teaching?
I don't know because I feel like Hohenheim spent a lot of time talking to it, and it feels like
Mm-hmm.
they formed almost this sort of friendship. And I do see a lot of kindness in Hohenheim,
And
especially when he was
when
younger.
even though yeah, I agree. And now that just makes me think like when the homunculi or when the dwarf in the flask like killed everyone, but then he saved Hohenheim and like
Mm.
he says he did it as a thank you, but do you think he cared for him? And like he did learn from Hohenheim some of
I
those
think
virtues.
there might be a bit of care in that relationship, but I also think it could have been more of like a there, now I don't owe you anything.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like a
That definitely,
you earn your keep kind of mentality. There's no room for generosity, which could be that's, a virtue that he
mm-hmm.
doesn't understand.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, that's enough
Yeah.
mind-boggling for the moment.
Sorry. I mean,
It was
but also
interesting
not
though.
sorry.
Yeah, but I guess moving on to story elements
Yes.
analysis, um, just good moments of characters coming together, like with Scar and Marco and all of them. The circumstances of the story are making allies that would otherwise be impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I feel like I've already mentioned this, but I love when characters like come together and work together and it's like the
Yeah.
power of friendship. Yeah. Anyway, and that was what we had for this episode. Um, so what was your favorite line, Megan?
Mine came from Fury because we do get a brief flash of him when they're explaining where all of Roy's comrades are at, fighting on the front lines. And he says, I'm gonna survive this. I'm gonna live. I won't die for this. And I just like appreciated him staying alive just out of sheer force of will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what was your favorite line?
Mine came from Hohenheim when he was talking to Pride and he said, but you can give him a message. Tell him that Slave 23 will be dropping in quite soon. I don't know. I loved I wouldn't know, don't know if I would say it's sassiness, but like the
Confidence.
confidence. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
He knows when to pick his battles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. And what did we learn in this episode?
we learned that sometimes you have to look at things from another angle, like when they were looking at the alchemy notes. There's a
Mm-hmm.
good reference in here to the movie Big Hero 6. That's one of the phrases they use is like use that big brain of yours to think another solution, look at it from a different angle. And that always makes me think of, yeah, take a deep breath, take a step back, get out of that rut that your mind has been in and think outside of the box.
Yeah, I like it. And then who pushed the story forward?
Well, first of all, May for figuring out how to arrange the notes, and then Al for figuring out to flip the notes over for the extra message or
Mm-hmm.
transmutation circle.
Yes, yes. All right. That is all we have for this episode. One other thing, we haven't mentioned it in a while, but if you have any questions or comments, we would love to discuss them on the podcast, and you can either email them to us at fullmetalbeyondthegate@gmail.com or DM us on our Instagram, which is at fullmetalbeyondthegate. And also follow us on Instagram because we post memes and other fun things.
Yes.
All right. We will be back next week with another episode.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.